We've been studying, for almost 3 decades now, behavior and comparing Christians to non-Christians. And so we've looked at consumer behavior, we've looked at relational behavior, we've looked at spiritual behavior, we've looked at employment behavior, we've looked at everything we can think of, media choices, etc. And what we find is that typically there's no discernible difference between those who are the most devoted Christians and those who are not. Now, there are areas where you'll find differences. Those who are the most committed Christians are more likely to give more money to churches. They're more likely to attend church services more often. They're more likely to read the Bible during a typical week. They're more likely to attend Christian education activities. But beyond that, the differences are really pretty minimal, even in terms of the theological beliefs of, let's say, born-again Christians and non-born-again adults. There are differences, but I mean, we're talking 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 percentage points between the two groups, which if you have a crowd in a room of 100 people and you look at them and let's say it's half born-agains, half non-born-agains, and the difference is 10 percentage points, 6 percentage points, 5 percentage points on items, as you observe those two groups of individuals, you can't tell the difference because it's not significant enough. There's not enough of a groundswell. There's not enough momentum there in terms of the distinction, in terms of how they think and behave, to say, wow, there's something really different about that person or that group, to want to dig deeper and figure out what makes for that change.
Are you talking about morality too?
Absolutely. Yeah. We look, for instance, at divorce. We know that born-again Christians have virtually the same divorce rate as non-born-again Christians. Atheists actually have a slightly lower divorce rate. Now, the reason there, you got to be careful, it's because they're less likely to get married, and more likely to cohabit and never get married, etc. But you look at getting drunk, you look at drug use, you look at engagement in homosexual activity, you look at the incidence of abortions. All of these things, I mean, again, 2, 3, 4 percentage points of difference, but nothing that's terribly significant.
Why? Let's get into it.
Yeah. I think the reason why you don't see major behavioral differences between Christians and non-Christians is that those people who consider themselves to be Christian, maybe they've asked Christ to forgive them for their sins so you can consider them born again, they haven't attempted to fully integrate the Christian life into every dimension of who they are. They've tried to become a better religious person. And so they'll attend church more, they'll give more money, they'll volunteer more hours, they'll go to more church classes. But when they go to work, do they respond to a coworker differently? No, because they haven't really absorbed the fullness of the teachings of Christ into how they think. You want to think like Jesus because you want to act like Jesus. But until you think like Jesus, you're not going to act like Jesus, unless you're just going to perform a play. And it's not really who you are, and you're going to slip up more often than not. So it goes back to, what have we been taught? What do we really embrace about what we've been taught? What have we seen modeled? Because we know that most of the behavior that we exhibit in our life is imitation. We imitate those people who we know, we trust, we believe in. Well, we don't see much modeling of real Jesus-like behavior. And so we just do the best we can with what we've got and figure, I meant well, isn't that good enough? And let it go with that.
I think we have a tendency to put the attributes of God in competition with each other. And so, yes, God is loving, but He's also just. God is loving, but He's also wrath. But see, if God is love, 1 John 4:8, and if Jesus reveals who God really is, His essence, Hebrews 1:3, then it's not the case that you have sort of, different attributes alongside of each other. love, justice, mercy, grace. But rather, you've got one thing, and that is God's perfect love, the love that's revealed on Calvary. And then everything God does is an expression of that. God's always self-consistent. So if God's wrathful, well, that is also done out of love. If God is just, and He is, that's also done out of love. Everything expresses God's love. So really, I don't think we should say love and wrath. We should say love as wrath, love as justice. And my own view is that what we call the wrath of God is simply what the love of God looks like when you're saying no to it. You'll experience it as, there's even a little bit of a parallel to that when Paul says, love your enemies because, and give them something to drink when they're thirsty and give them something to eat when they're hungry, because in doing that you'll pour hot coals on their head. And he's using an idiom there, which just means you bring shame on someone. It's really hard for your enemy to keep on persecuting you if you keep being nice to them. You bring conviction on them. But there's a certain pain dimension of that. So also, I think God's love, when we're resisting it, running away from it, rebelling, it gets experienced as wrath, and it can be terrible. But it's not in competition with God's love. I think God always is one and the same. He's the self-same, self-consistent God. But what changes is how we're going to experience it based on how we respond to it.